Hello, Jim here from Northern Ohio. Beautiful day, about 60 degrees outside, sunshine, clear skies, slight breeze. Couldn't ask for a more beautiful day. Out here and enjoying it. I hope whoever's listening, this finds you well. Today I want to talk about faith, religion, church. Some people grew up in church. Some people went to church later in life. Everyone has a story in that regard. They have different faiths, the way they were raised, whether they were Mormon, Catholic, Orthodox, Presbyterian, Baptist, Hindu. It just depends on where you're from, who you are. We all have that journey. And I think that no matter who you are, whatever your background is or what your belief system is, you can even be an atheist. And I believe that you're still a moral and spiritual human being. I grew up in church. I grew up in a Methodist church. My Sunday school teacher, well, she was my neighbor, Evelyn, and she invited me to go to church. And interestingly, my family didn't go, neither did her husband. And so her husband would come down and pick me up and then drop me and Evelyn off to church and then pick us up after. Then when I was old enough to drive, I would go down and pick Evelyn up and we would go to church together. And I enjoyed it for the most part. It was a place that I could go. I remember it was mostly older people, and they were always welcoming, non-judgmental to me. Great Sunday school teachers, great classes. We had programs. We'd have breakfasts. We had youth group. So overall, it was a good experience. I learned a lot. But I have some critique about it as I've gotten older. And when I was going to church, I did notice how robotic it could be sometimes. We had our bulletin. Everything was laid out in the church bulletin. Choir sings, you do this, you say that. Stand up, sit down, say the Apostles' Creed. And it was just this and that, the doxology. And church ended. And I just thought how mechanical that was. You'd hear a message and you'd go home. And that was pretty much it. I didn't really feel like I was being moved spiritually or where I felt presence of God there or anything. It was just mechanical. I graduated high school, joined the military, and while I was in the military, I did attend some non-denominational churches. I remember when I went to basic training, they had church services for different faiths, and I chose the non-denominational one. And like lot of young people. I was 19 when I joined the military, so in 19, in my 20s, I turned away from it or slipped away from it. It was still a part of me, but I wasn't going to church, I wasn't reading the Bible, I wasn't going to Bible studies or anything like that. And then throughout the years, I would go off and on. And then I discovered the Christian radio, and I would actually listen to Christian radio to and from work. Family talk, focus on the family, just a lot of good Christian programming, and they'd have the speakers on and talking about different topics and how families overcame different things and problems with kids and overcoming challenges and child rearing and all of that. I just found it interesting, and I thought maybe it was a good preparation for me to hear some of this stuff as a single man. And the years continued to go by, and then decided to go back into church. Then I started to, but here's the thing, I always struggled on what to believe, on whether or not the Bible was real or not. Was there really a Jesus? Is there really a hell? And I always thought the Bible was a good book. I thought that it was, and still do, that it's divinely inspired, the way it's written, how things were written in the Old Testament, prophesied, fast forward in time, and it came to fruition. It's pretty amazing. So it's still a good book to live by. But I always struggled on what to believe. And I didn't really think I was really truly living the Christian life. And then I discovered later in listening to a radio program during Easter, this guy was talking about the historical evidence for Jesus in Scripture. He was talking about secular writers like Josephus, who wrote about Jesus, and supposedly there was this ossuary, which is a bone box, that had Caiaphas, the high priest's, I believe it was his son's bones, or his bones were in this box. And there was a cornerstone found with Pontius Pilate's name written on it. And I thought, whoa. So here's some actual historical, tangible pieces of evidence that support what was written in the Bible. So that really opened me up, made me dig in deeper into it, and to really start putting and trusting it more, believing it more, and really living what's outlined in the Scripture. And then I remember, and I had never read the Bible in its entirety at that time, and that's when I started. Then I decided, you know what, I'm going to read the Bible from cover to cover for the first time in my life. And that was back in 2016, 17, when I read the Bible in its entirety for the first time, and was doing my best to live it, denying myself, and picking up the cross and follow me, as Jesus said. And it wasn't easy. It's not easy to live that type of a lifestyle. Then as the time goes by, you know, that I'm going to churches, And I'm seeing what's going on in the church. And so I think this is probably the main focus, or the main topic of this video, is why I left the modern day church. I quit attending. I quit going. During COVID, I was doing online church. I did that for a while. But I would go to these churches, and then I was actually reading the Bible on my own. And I started to notice things. For example, salvation. How some churches will do what's called an altar call, and the piano or the music will start to play, and the pastor will start to entice people to move forward, and people will move forward to make a decision to accept Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. And somebody would pray with them, and then at the end they would all stand in the front, and people would congratulate them. Welcome to the family, blah, blah, blah. Their name is written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and they're saved. But I wasn't seeing that in my Bible. And I thought that was too easy. It wasn't, to me, it just didn't seem to make sense just to say something like that. Say these words, say this prayer, invite Jesus in your heart, and as long as you meant it, you were good to go. And I think there's a lot of people out there that made that decision in a church, or whether they were in a church camp as a youngster, as a teenager, and did that, and they think they're saved, but yet their lifestyle doesn't reflect that. And so, Jesus talked about, and what caught my attention is that in Luke 14, Jesus talks about when someone's making a tower, that they first consider they have enough money to build it. He said, sit down and count the cost. When we invite those people forward for an altar call, have we explained to them just what they're signing up for? And even in Luke 9, someone asked Jesus, hey, I want to follow you. And it was as if Jesus was discouraging him, and he says, foxes have dens, the birds in the air, they've got nests to stay in and to go, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And I don't think that we do that. Just saying a simple prayer, in my humble opinion, is not cutting it when it comes to salvation. I don't agree with that. Tithing, this is a big one. Most every church I've ever gone to, except for one that I found, it took some digging to find it, but anyway, every church I've ever gone to, even growing up in the Methodist church, there's offering plates. And you'll often hear tithing 10% of your income. And oftentimes they'll quote pastors the Malachi 3 about robbing God, and how that if you are not bringing your tithes and your offerings, you're robbing God, and if you don't do that, you're going to be cursed. That's Old Testament. You don't find that in the New Testament. And after Pentecost, there's no mention, at least for my reading, there's no mention of tithing. But there is mentioned in the New Testament to give cheerfully, not out of compulsion or out of want, but out of a heart of gratitude, to give that way what your heart desires to give, not this 10% of your income. And if you study it, you'll realize that that was back in the day like a tax back then. And if you think about it, 10% of your income, let's do some math here. You get 10 people give 10% of their income. So that organization, that pastor's receiving 100% of a salary, average salary there. And just imagine multiplying that by many congregants in that church. That's how come a lot of these pastors become millionaires. And to me, it's deception in the Christian church. And they're deceiving people by doing that and telling them about Malachi and that you're going to be cursed. I tell you one thing, when somebody shoves an offering plate in my face, I'm not cheerful. And if I remember correctly in the Bible, Jesus taught about the left hand shouldn't know what the left hand should know what the right hand's doing, that you give in secret. And from my perspective, when you're passing around an offering plate, you're violating that passage of Scripture right there. But what do you suggest, Jim? I like the idea of an offering box. Put it in the back of the church or somewhere. And when people feel led to give, let them give in the box. Don't pass around offering plate or an offering bucket, or have people go down in front and march across the front of the altar and they pass through, dropping their offerings in the bucket as they go and sit back down into the seats. I've seen that before. And you know what I equate that to? Say, for example, one of Elon Musk's kids comes to my house asking for money, and I recognize the kid. I'd be like, hey, aren't you Elon Musk's son or daughter, the Tesla car guy? And they say, yeah, he's a billionaire. Yeah. Well, why are you asking me for money? So that's my thing to the preachers out there. Hey, preacher, why are you asking me? Well, you know, Jim, Jesus had a treasurer. Yes, he did. I don't ever remember after he gave his teachings, as he was talking to the masses, ever having the disciples, okay, disciples, go around and still collect an offering. I didn't see it. But I do recall Jesus made his request known to his Father. And he was always taken care of and had money in that bag. And I think pastors need to do the same. Make your request known to the Father. Don't ask the congregation. Don't ask me. And when the Spirit moves people, you'll be surprised what you'll find in that offering box in the back of the church. That's my recommendation. Secularization in the church, watered down theology, telling people what they want. We see it. And you see it on the mainstream. The Joel Osteen types. These are going to be the best days of your life. You know, all that stuff, and just telling people what they want to hear. And that man can pack them in by the stadium full. Just feeding people what they want to hear, this watered down Christianity. And what amazes me is those prosperity preachers, and people still give their money to these people. And they're flying around in these jets and cars and living in these big mansions, and they're still doing it to this day. Even that Jimmy Swaggart, he's still on doing it. I'm passing through some channels and I'm seeing that. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Yep. Send in that $1,000 seed and see how the Lord doesn't bless you. And people and see the dollar signs spooling up at the bottom of the screen as they have their call-a-thons. And so you go into some of these places and they're huge. These big churches now, they've got all these different names, a fresh wind, heart on fire, whatever. And you can literally, I've gone into those places, went to a service and walked out, and not one person ever said a word to me. That's how huge those places are. You walk in, it's like a college campus. Hallways curving around, there's a second level, people walking across, library, coffee shop, and wow. And then you walk into the big stadium, big old mag screen, stadium seating, and a lot of people don't bring Bibles anymore. They've got their Bible app on their phone, or they're spoon-fed everything on the screen. And it's like a concert. The praise and worship band, it's like a rock concert. Skinny jeans and fog machines. You know, and they get everybody rolling. Whoa, hello, church, come on, let's go. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. And they're just doing, you know, high and lifted up. Oh yeah, it'll move you. It'll move you. And they're down there and they're lifting up them holy hands. Oh, the Holy Spirit's moving in here. Well, you know what that is to me? It's just emotional stirring. And it's music. It's music. But I guess if that's what works for you, not to take it away, if people get something from that and they get a spiritual experience out of that, I guess I can't knock it. But I observe it, and it just seems so worldly. It doesn't look any different than any concert I've got, secular rock concert that I would go to. Looks very similar. And it just doesn't seem like it's about sanctification, the conforming yourself into the likeness of Christ. They're more today like community centers, clubs. And they're good. They're good. You know, they're a sense of community, great programs for the kids, they're loving it. Great family programs, great, wonderful. And so I can see the good in it. But yet at the same time, I can take a step back and just see how worldly it is. And of course, they don't have offering plates in those places. They got offering buckets, plastic pails, baby. And they go through there and cha-ching, and they're shaking out them tubs of money, baby, raking it in. And something tells me that's what it's all about. Go to any place, go take a survey. What do people want? You can start up a church overnight. Just give people what they want. Just give them what they want. Build it, and they will come in droves. I'm in the wrong racket. And things like women pastors. 1 Timothy talks about that a woman shouldn't have authority over a man. That's Bible. Not to take away from women in the church, they can still do a lot of things. They can still teach, they can still do Bible studies, classes. I think they even qualify to be deacons. But when it comes to eldership and being like the head pastor of the place, I don't agree with that. And if that's the case there at a church, I will not attend it. Because from my reading of the Bible, leadership is male. I said it. And it even goes back to the Garden of Eden. Who did God talk to during that snake in the apple incident? What did God say to Adam? God didn't talk to Eve. He said what? Adam, where are you? He held him accountable, not her. And I think we'll notice how today church attendance is down. Go on any Sunday and see the parking lots. A lot of the parking lots aren't full, and you'll even hear it from people. Boy, we just don't have hardly anybody coming to our church anymore. And then talk to the younger generation. They're not going. And then you've got people like myself that are just disenchanted with it, and we're seeing what's going on, and people are deciding, you know what, I can study my Bible on my own, or they just have a group of people, or they're doing just home churches, 4 or 5 people, and they just get together and they do their own church. And I don't see anything wrong with that at all. That's actually Bible, to do a home church. That was the way the original church a lot of times was. And they broke bread together and did all that. Yeah. There was a book written, Why Men Hate Going to Church by David Murrell. And I read a little bit of it. And it was interesting how he noted how a lot of the things that are going on in church and programs are geared or are attractive to women. They're more geared to the women in the church. And a lot of times men feel out of place in church. They would much rather stay home and let the wife and kids go to church. But if he does go, he just doesn't, he'd much rather be somewhere else. He'd much rather be in a place like this, fishing. This is where he feels closer to God. Right here. Right here. Not in a church. Not in a church pew. Getting bored out of his mind. Dealing with all that. It's a common lament. And this author did a quiz, and he gave people 2 sets of qualities, set A and set B. And set A listed some competence, or some values like competence, efficiency, skills, accomplishment. And then set B was love, nurturing, helping, feelings, loving cooperation, personal expression. And then he asked, of both sets of values there, he asked people which of those values best represents, as the best representation of Christ and his values. And the majority of people picked set B. And then he continued, he says, where he got those two sets of values from. He said that he plucked it right out of the best-selling book, Men Are From Mars, Women From Venus. And the set B values that the majority of people picked that represented what they thought was representative of Christ and his values was the Venus side, which represented the women. Those were the women values, was set B, the Venus values. And I found that interesting. And then he continued to say that an organization built on those Venus values, the women values, those values will attract people whose gifts and skills are aligned with those values, and that people with these types of skills will find a home there in that church. And then those that don't have those values they will not feel comfortable in that church. And I thought, wow, now isn't that interesting? And so those are some of the things that just I have to start now questioning the modern day church. Then to top it all off, I discovered this author by the name of Tom Harper. And he wrote a book called The Pagan Christ. And I will put a link down of a short talk that he gave on a new understanding of Christianity. And he believes, from his studies, and I think he was a former Anglican priest, and he taught Bible studies. And here's a guy that studied the literature, and his determination was that Jesus was a made-up character, and that the Bible is actually myth and allegory and stories, and that we've throughout the ages we are interpreting it wrong from the original meaning. And he brought up examples like the 40 days and 40 nights that Jesus was in the desert. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Moses wandered the desert for 40 years. In the Bible, it has symbolism. It's not so much the years. The 40 is the gestation period. The 40 weeks gestation for the development of a fetus. So it means that something is to come, to be born. And that he said he could continue to explain other numbers and the significance of it. So there's a lot of symbolism in that. What we've done throughout the ages is that we've literalized it, we've historical and literalized the Bible. And that's not the way it originally was supposed to be, about sinners and inviting Jesus in your heart. No, he thinks that it is the Christ that lives in you, that everybody around us are divine people. And if you're looking for God, you're looking right here in you. And like the Apostle Paul said, the Christ in you. That right there really opened my eyes. And for people to hear that, it's going to upset a lot of people, because it's going to upend what they've based their life on. And for them to think, wow, could Jesus be a made-up person? He never was a literal historical person. And there was even something, you can Google this, called the Jesus Project, where 50 scholars from different walks of life set out not to disprove Jesus, but to show actual evidence and support that he actually existed. The project was discontinued, disbanded, defunded. They got nothing. They had nothing to really show for sure, definitively, yep, by golly, there was actually literal, historical Jesus Christ that walked this earth for approximately 33 years. And that there's very little evidence for it. So there's something that I'm thinking about, or I'm working on now, and diving into. So that's why now, for me, I've taken a step back from the Christian church, the actual brick and mortar building. I still believe. I believe in a creator. I believe the Bible is divinely inspired. I think it's a great book. So it doesn't, my thought process, my new information doesn't change a whole lot. It just changes my understanding of Christianity. And if I do go back to a church, I may look at it differently than those sitting in the pews with me. And so unless something changes and I get the evidence that says, boom, right here it is, this is definitive, boom, he really did exist, okay, that's one thing. But until then, I'm going to continue to think for myself. And I've read the books. I've read other books besides Tom Harper's book. There's one called The Jesus Mysteries, and there's others. And boy, they can go into detail and break it down, and how we have gotten to where we are and how we got into our current belief system. And it is eye-opening. And I will tell you, it makes sense to me. And there's a lot of people out there that are going to shake their head and say, oh, that's been debunked and blah, blah, blah. Jesus Christ saved me and blah, blah, blah. And hey, good for you. Perhaps he did. I'm not going to take away from that. Take away from people's faith and whatever works for them and all that. I'm just sharing where I'm at, and that others out here may be in a similar boat to where you're questioning it now. You're looking at it. There's even Catholics. They're starting to read their Bible and they're stepping out. And they're questioning it. Things like the veneration of the Virgin Mary. And they were getting in their Bibles, and I believe it's in Matthew, where Jesus said, there is no one born higher that's born of a woman than John the Baptist. No one higher than that. That's Jesus saying that now. And so some Catholics are seeing that now. They're like, wait a minute, but we venerate Mary, but Jesus said, no, John the Baptist is higher than that, than her. So they're starting to question their faith. And I think, and there's Catholics that are leaving. And I think if Catholics read their Bible, I think more of them would leave, because they'll see a lot of the stuff that they're doing in some of these other churches is tradition. It's not scriptural. It's straight up tradition. And scripted, robotic. And so I think there's people out there that are starting to think for themselves. You don't have to be spoon-fed this stuff or depend on the so-called man of God and do everything that he or she says because they said so. You're a human being just like they are. You can easily open up the Bible and study it for yourself and read it for yourself. You don't need somebody to interpret it for you. People are waking up in more ways than one. And it's not just in Christianity, but in other things. And they're starting to realize in many situations and areas of life, we've been lied to. We've been lied to from the word go. and the stuff that we were fed since we were children and what we believed. And then look at where we are now. I think I've rambled on enough on this subject. Perhaps some people could relate to some of it. I know some of you are not going to agree with what I said. I'm sure I'm going to hear a lot of rebuttals in regards to this. And it's a lot of stuff I've already heard before. Well, Jim, did you read the book by The Case for Christ? I think the guy's last name is Wallace, I think the author's name is. Did you read that book? Or Lee Strobel. The Case for Christ, did you read that book? Yes, I read that book. Well, you know, this and that and a third, and a ho-ho-hum. Yes, I know. Remember, I was on that side. So I understand the talking points that you're probably going to throw at me. I've heard it. I know. I got it. And on and on and on we can go. And how we can justify this and flip it and twist it and contort it to justify we're going to think this way. And my challenge is, hey, maybe it's time to do a new way of thinking and twist our brains. I know my world has been completely flipped upside down recently. Things that I used to believe and thought for sure, that ain't the case. It's not the case at all. Because I do my research and I cross-reference and I use critical thinking skills, and I'm not just going to follow blindly and to do what somebody says that we got to do and toe the line. Anyway, that's enough of that. Thanks for listening, and I will see you on the next one.